Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. The team has finally gotten it together. We are all three here to start the show at the new time. We hope you're here too. We're live on YouTube and Facebook. We hope you'll like, subscribe. We're also very excited tonight because we feel like we've finally gotten the right foundation for what this show is truly about. Last time we were talking about human rights. 2 shows ago we were talking about the Declaration of Independence and that it refers to unalienable rights and that these are considered, and it was Thomas Farr who wrote in the New York Times, or excuse me, the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, that this was a declaration that applied to everyone and was non-coercive. And that was one of the reasons it was radically wonderful. We then took that and said, well, it didn't really apply to everyone because it really only applied to American citizens or people on, this part of the world, this real estate that was under the control of that covenant, of that initial charter, i.e. the Constitution of the United States of America. So we then took a step and said, well, there is a universal one, and that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was issued in 1948 under the auspices of the United Nations in the wake of the Holocaust. And the State of Israel was founded in the wake of that, and this Declaration of Human Rights, it all kind of came out of that event of World War II. In other words, through a crisis, humanity established this new universal charter for all humankind. And we want to lay that as the foundation because you might say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I'm sure there will be some who will disagree or contest this, but that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights really was given birth to by the religions that preceded it, the religious thoughts that preceded it, those statements such as the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, as we know, which comes from Jesus as recorded in the so-called New Testament. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights really does seem like the right place to begin in this show about what is really the role of religion in society. We're going to start now with a video that is about 9.5 minutes long. We're going to try really hard just to let the whole video play and not to interrupt it and jump in as we have done in the past, so that you can get the sweep that is presented in this video of human history and what it took to arrive at this Universal Declaration, and therefore feel the heft of it, the monumental weight of having arrived at that point in history in 1948 when this was issued. This video is also kind of fun to watch and entertaining, so we hope you'll like it as much as we did, and once we've finished the video, we will talk about it. And we hope that you're ready to provide your comments and input as well, whether it's on the Facebook channel or the YouTube channel. So without any further ado, here we go.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Well, that's tough.
Wow.
I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Yeah, any right that I think just as a normal, human,
The rights that humans have.
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Menneskeret kan betyde mange ting.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, una domanda complicatissima.
Yes, we just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, They're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live.
Equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born. The idea spread quickly to Greece, to India, and eventually to Rome. They noticed that people naturally followed certain laws, even if they weren't told to. They called this natural law, but it kept getting trampled on by those in power. Not until 1,000 years later in England did they finally get a king to agree that no one can overrule the rights of the people, not even a king. People's rights were finally recognized, and they were now safe from those in power. Kind of. It still took a bunch of British rebels declaring their independence before the king got the point that all men are created equal. Which isn't to say he liked the idea, but he couldn't stop them, and America was born. The French immediately followed with their own revolution for their own rights. Their list was even longer, and they insisted that these rights weren't just made up. They were natural. The Roman concept of natural law had become natural rights. Unfortunately, not everyone was so thrilled. In France, a general named Napoleon decided to overthrow the new French democracy and crown himself emperor of the world. He almost succeeded, but the countries of Europe joined forces and defeated him. Human rights was again a hot topic. They drew up international agreements, broadly granting many rights across Europe. But only across Europe. The rest of the world somehow still didn't qualify. Instead, they got invaded, conquered, and consumed by Europe's massive empires. But then a young lawyer from India decided enough was enough. His name was Mahatma Gandhi, and in the face of violence, he insisted that all people of Earth had rights, not just in Europe. Eventually, even Europeans started to agree. But it wasn't going to be that easy. 2 world wars erupted. Hitler exterminated half the Jewish population of Earth in horrifying Nazi death camps. And all told, 90 million people died. Never had human rights been so terrifyingly close to extinction. And never had the world been more desperate for change. So the countries of Earth banded together and formed the United Nations. Their basic purpose was to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. But what were human rights? Were they the proclamations of Cyrus, the natural laws of Rome, the declarations of France? Everyone seemed to have a slightly different idea of what human rights should be. But under the supervision of Eleanor Roosevelt, they finally agreed on a set of rights that applied to absolutely everyone. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The French concept of natural rights had finally become human rights. So, in summary, at first, only a few lucky people had any rights, until one of those guys decided, hey, other people should have some rights too, which was great, except not everyone agreed. And it only took a few thousand years of fighting and declarations and more fighting until everyone finally agreed that human rights should apply to everyone. And they all lived happily ever after. Except for one little problem. If people have the right to food and shelter, why are 16,000 children dying of starvation every day? 1 every 5 seconds. If people have freedom of speech, why are thousands in prison for speaking their minds? If people have the right to education, why are over 1 billion adults unable to read? If slavery has truly been abolished, why are 27 million people still enslaved today? More than twice as many as in 1800. The fact is, when it was signed, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not have the force of law. It was optional. And despite many more documents, conventions, treaties, and laws, it's still little more than words on a page. So the question is, who will make those words a reality?
I have a dream today.
When Dr. King marched for racial equality, he was marching for rights that had been guaranteed by the United Nations for almost 2 decades. But still, he marched. When Nelson Mandela stood up for social justice in the 1990s, his country had already agreed to abolish such discrimination for almost 40 years. But still, he fought. Those who fight today against torture, poverty, and discrimination are not giants or superheroes. They're people. Kids, mothers, fathers, teachers. Free-thinking individuals who refuse to be silent. Who realize that human rights are not a history lesson. They're not words on a page. They're not speeches or commercials or PR campaigns. They are the choices we make every day as human beings. They are the responsibility we all share to respect each other, to help each other, and to protect those in need. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere.
I had to let that last note fade out. I love that video. Daniel, I don't think you'd had a chance to see the whole thing through yet. Jafar, you're the one that surfaced this and shared it. Thank you very much. I'll let one of you start with your thoughts and comments.
That was great. It was a really good video. The first part, I especially like the pulling you through history, and I dabble in content creation. That's what we do with a lot of the videos that we make and stuff. But I mean, how amazingly well done that was, right? Like, try to reverse engineer. It was, it was very nicely done, graphically. And I like how impartial it was as it pulled through history, right? It seemed to do a really good job of that. And then it started to get into some of the more contemporary stuff, and that's where I think the conversation starts to enter into the picture. So that's how I would.
As Paul Simon said in Graceland, one of the songs on Graceland, what are you going to do about it? That's what I'd like to know. Oh, the full line is, will breakdowns come and breakdowns go? What are you going to do about it? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Jafar. Oh, go ahead, Daniel. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, Jafar, I wanted to hear what you thought about the video, too.
I only had one thought, and it was, the way that the video was done dramatically, it made you feel really good, and I kind of felt that a lot of what we want in as a civilization or as a race to kind of come to this point when, it's kind of one of the goals of humanity, right? For everyone to live equally and have these rights and have equal opportunity, and no one's uneducated or hungry. So it's like one of the shining stars of what we are collectively striving for. So I kind of was struck by that. That's kind of obvious, but I kind of noticed it more this time watching it.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out for me was the 2 steps forward, 1 step back nature. The repetitiveness of, it was born, but then this. They used the phrase, it was born twice. So I guess it was born twice. It was born again, pun intended. But there was just one little problem, right? And that little problem was World War II and the extermination of fully half of a race on this planet, right? So did you guys get that same sense of 2 steps forward, 1 step back? That, or it was only universal human rights applied to a select few, right? Oxymoron. In the case of Europe, before its great expansion, and in line with that, though, there's a crisis, which leads to the next step forward, right? It's the collapse of whatever it was that led up to that. Well, let me put it differently. So you have Cyrus the Great, who, had one of the greatest empires on earth, who made this advance. And probably his ability to transcend the forms of government and empire building of past great leaders, to transcend and take it to a new level where he was able to stay in control while also allowing greater freedom to a degree, but then that also collapsed. And we're struggling with those exact same things today, where we have greater capacity and greater freedom and greater sharing of information and greater sharing of goods across the planet, instant communications, rapid distribution of goods produced in any corner of the planet through a very involved system of systems. And yet the latest developments, social media and information sharing can turn dark, can turn into manipulation and using those same tools and means to control and misinform and try to mislead and so on. We have this 2 step forward, 1 step back going on even to this day, and the challenges are eerily similar, but also different and nuanced at each stage of this development or this unfolding.
It's like a expansion, and like there's an outward growth, and then it has to consolidate in the form of being tested, or in the case of Europe, they had this they gained these rights, but then they went out and hypocritically denied them to everyone else in the world.
I have lots to say.
Please say. Share.
Well, first of all, I want to understand your birth renewal comment. Is this it seemed to be insinuating a Jesus reference there, and I just wanted to make that explicit if that was the case.
It was, but it was more just a pun from where I come from, that the video makers mentioned that it was born with the clay tablet of Cyrus the Great, and then later when they talked about America, they said, and it was born. So it was born again, which immediately for any Christian conjures up that phrase. I didn't really mean to imply anything other than it was funny to me in the video that it was born twice. It really can't be born twice, so it must have been born again somehow.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I brought that up is that in an attempt to really get closer to a Christian faith and religion, I think a secular thinker has to, and I'll stay away from any term or reference to atheist because I think it's not helpful. Personally, I really don't think it's helpful. but I think when I look at it from when I'm analyzing or thinking about the Christian faith, that's one aspect of the Christian faith and the religion that I find to be feels almost like a trap, and it's and do justice or do the people that are believing it, Christians. I don't think it's intended to be a trap, but it's fairly circular in its reasoning, right? So, and what I mean by that is that it has this kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy to it. Anything that kind of happens as a reoccurrence is born again or repeats itself. It's like the basic level of pattern recognition from a human species. It's like, we own that. It's like, no, wait a minute. You just, you can't own that, right? I mean, but in that sort of operating system, it's like, okay, yeah, see, that's proof. That's another reason for his existence. And I don't know, it's like saying this is the last religion because you call it the last religion. It can't have another religion. It's the last one. Right? Like, I don't know. It just...
Well, so you raise an interesting point, and I'll just mention my books. The first one, The People of the Sign. The whole book deals with this issue of a hermetically sealed belief system, a self-reinforcing belief system. Let me give you an example, which was the case in my belief system, but it applies more universally to all of Christianity and even other religions that have a concept of a devil, right? And that is that in the Bible, you are told to hold fast to the faith once delivered. You're told to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And you're told that the devil walks about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, right? So anything that would dissuade you of what you believe is a test from God to see if you're going to stay faithful, or a satanic deception trying to deceive you, right? And so you do become locked into a hermetically sealed belief system that is self-reinforcing. And efforts to convince you that you're wrong are viewed in that context. And it's therefore very difficult to grow and change if one has improperly, and I'm going to put it this way because I am a true believer. I'm not criticizing it, but I apply my mind to this. As a true believer, it's very dangerous to be locked into dogma. You have to be open to the fact that you don't understand the religion that you profess. You don't have all the answers. It is not exactly the way you think it is. The being that gave you this insight from that religious perspective, right? You've received special insight that through prayer, through meditation, has been given to you. The pearl of great price, right, that you've discovered, and you go and sell everything else to obtain that pearl, as it's described in one of Jesus' parables. And once you have it, don't let go of it. But if you've misunderstood it, you become locked in error, and nothing can dissuade you of your error. So you raise a really good point, Daniel. That's a challenging one.
Yeah, it's amazing how we can kind of walk together in down that explanation very like in sequence, right? I can follow you. I can agree with that step. I can agree with that step. I can agree with that step. I can follow you completely. And then, but where it gets shaky was the one handed to you by like an almighty power, and then my little asterisk comes up, and I say, but we're pretending because this is like an embodiment of the good. It's not an actual dude or a guy or an entity, right? Or
so exactly. I mean, I had to say that because it's very important to me to not be disingenuous. It's very important to me to share my bias. I'm happy to openly share my bias. I'm not expecting you to accept and believe that, but you must know that about me. You follow me? I'm just being completely open and transparent of where I'm coming from. But there's a secular version of that, right? We saw it in this video. Cyrus the Great came up with his own vision of it, right? Now, did he get it? Was it special insight, divinely given to him? Well, back then, kings and emperors, they were gods, right? And you know, let me go back. When I was in Egypt, and I was touring around Egypt, we had just an amazing tour guide, and he took us to this one place, palace, pyramid. I forget exactly where it was, but he showed to us where there was this trap door, and he was talking about Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh, and the boy pharaoh was taught to go into this chamber to pray, but the priest could be hiding literally under the floor, and when he prayed, the priest could literally be giving him the answer from God, and he would think it was God responding. You follow me?
Yeah.
And so that Pharaoh would believe that he was actually receiving the answer from God, and that would be instilled at a young age. Hopefully you see the connection that I'm making here is that, you know, people and whether you get it from your interpretation of the data that's delivered from science, right? And then you're consumed with some degree of ego that makes you think that you're somehow some kind of savior figure that's going to disseminate that knowledge and coerce people to adopt certain behaviors.
You're so great, and then you buck a little bit, right? You just go a little bit. It was so elegant and beautiful, Wade. It was so elegant and beautiful.
Well, it is, but we are human beings. Me, you, and everyone on this planet.
Yeah.
And as it says again in the Bible, we hold this treasure in earthen vessels. Actually, that may not be a Bible quote now that I think about it. We hold this treasure in earthen vessels that are cracked and flawed. The word sincere, it is said, this is disputed, but it comes from without wax, meaning that it was a pot that had not been cracked and sealed over with wax, right? It was whole and complete. It was sincere, without wax. We are sincere, but those cracks and those flaws are hidden, and humans act in ways that they even deceive themselves as to what they're doing, what they're accomplishing. And even when they seek to accomplish good, they're often creating repercussions. And you follow me? So,
yeah.
So my point is, take a secular version of what I said earlier about the hermetically sealed belief system. Doesn't have to have been handed to you by any divine being, but for everyone on the planet, whether they're religious or not, believes they're right, believes they've come to the right conclusions and adopted the right perspective and is going about life in an intelligent, thoughtful way, right? Even the criminal who murders somebody will usually justify it and somehow think it was okay what they did, right? So it doesn't matter what belief system you have, you're justifying it and you believe it's right. That's really what I was getting at. Just being open and transparent that I happen to believe there is a supreme power that can give us that insight and you can obtain it from that source. But that's neither here nor there for the analogy that I'm trying to use.
Good point. I have to say I liked your when you were explaining about the young child, and I wanted to kind of bring this back to a bit of a memory of your transition or acceptance into God, acceptance of faith into your life, right? And so the way I understand the story, because I've heard it a couple times, there was that pivotal moment of the, I don't know if it was a motorcycle accident or a car accident.
It was a Firebird Esprit.
There we go. See, I'm
a Trans Am without the trim.
Slowly myelinating this, right? So I get it. But so do you remember? I don't know if you remember, and it might have been a martial arts movie that I watched when I was growing up, and it had this baby, and they put him in a barrel of water to see if the baby would still swim. Still was infant-like enough in order to be taught from that kind of like primordial, like first instance of human, right?
Yep.
And if it could swim, I guess, then it was okay, right? I don't know. Are you guys following me at all?
I haven't seen that movie, and I don't know where you're going, so no,
Okay,
not really. But yes and no.
So the point that the correlation that I drew in that was quite beautiful is that if you take a young child and instill them with all the beauty of religion, right? And, you know, the atheists, their eyes are rolling in their heads, right? But if you take everything that you know to be beautiful in your faith and instill that at a young enough age, then in theory it should imprint on them in a way that'll last a lifetime.
Absolutely, and in my case, well, it goes even back a little further. And one of the reviews of my first book that I really treasure was somebody who pointed this out, and I'm glad he picked up on it because it was intentional. In Minehead, England, at one of those summer camps that is featured in the movie Tommy, if you've ever seen it, with Elton John years ago, and a British holiday camp in Minehead, England. The Worldwide Church of God celebrated its 8-day annual religious festival there in 1970. And after having been kidnapped and taken away from my mother and living in Sweden with my aunt and uncle, my dad came, ordered by the courts now after 2 years of me being separated from both parents and my two sisters. Ordered by the court, he came and set up household with us, and by now he had become a member, or was about to become a member, in the Worldwide Church of God. And so he took us in his little Volkswagen Beetle and drove us to Düsseldorf, Germany, where we got on a flight with the German church members' chartered flight and flew to Minehead to celebrate this 8-day religious festival. And the church had rented the holiday camp, the whole camp. And it was in late September, early October, so it was the end of the season, and annually they kept this 8-day religious festival, and the church members saved up 10% of their gross income, a tithe, to celebrate the holy days. Now, these were Jewish holy days. It was the Feast of Sukkoth, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles, and what we called the last great day, the 8th day. So for the 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles and the last great day, the 8th day, we celebrated in this holiday camp along with hundreds of other church members who had saved up to have this very, for them, luxurious vacation for 8 days. And it was this grand, wonderful family of people who all believed the same way and who were all there sharing their love and their joy that they experienced for their beliefs. And one night during the camp, all the rides were open and the kids could go on all the rides. I mean, we sat in church for 2 hours a day and 4 hours a day on the 2 holy days, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and every morning when it wasn't a holy day, 2 hours. So, you know, what is that? 8 times 2, 16. So 20 hours of church services during that week. But on that night when they opened up the camp and all the rides were free, I mean, you were in heaven as a kid. And that moment was really what hooked me. But it wasn't just the cotton candy and the free gifts and the rides. It was the love that was experienced and shared by these families in that 8-day event that for me was so lacking after, again, having been kidnapped and ripped away from my mother unceremoniously, you know, just basically taken one day, and 2+ years later, I still had not seen my mother and had lived with my aunt and uncle. And now my dad and my two sisters and me were all at this camp, and there was other families showering love and affection on these new people and these new kids. That was that moment, not really the car. The car accident, though, transferred those emotional experiences and feelings towards the being that, in my opinion, was the source of that love that was experienced by those families, to God himself in that car wreck where I should have been dead. And I won't go into the details here of how and why, but I should have been dead, and I felt very much that I had been divinely protected, and to this day I maintain that. So, you know, yeah, those are seminal moments, and I recognize that psychologically you can analyze that, you know, Wade, you're just want to believe that. I get all that. I get all that. And I'm not here to just talk about myself, but as an example of the kind of thing that happens to each and every individual. If you probe your own history, your psychological history, you can go back in your own experiences and understand why you came to certain conclusions and what led you to those decisions. but they shouldn't remove the magic of what is happening in your life as you seek, with your freedom of choice, seek to find your way on this earth to become whatever it is that you need to become. And that's that non-coercive part that is another element of what this show is about, understanding the role of religion in society in a way that is non-coercive. I don't know if that helps anything, Daniel, or derails what you were getting at, but
No, I think it does. I'm curious what our friend Jafar has to say about the faith experience and Wade's story.
I mean, I came to my kind of story is a lot different than Wade's, I guess, but it's also different than yours, Daniel. Well, actually, I don't know kind of how you grew up, but I guess the thought that I was coming to was just about how we define God. And if I start going off track, let me know. But God is that. My hypothesis is that what allows science to operate and to grow and discover it is the same thing that allows religion to do that. And I'm not trying to jam God into science at all. But I think so, and this gets back to religion, because I don't think, like, if you have a specific religion, you can say that it has its God, right? Because those people in that religion are going to have ideas about God, and that's going to restrict their idea of God, right? So each religion is going to kind of say, oh, no, God is this, God is that, God is this, and I think in a sort of similar way, science has a version of God. You don't have to call it God, but there's a phenomena or a psychological phenomena that functions in science to allow us to hypothesize and to search for greater and greater truths, causes of causes, first cause, primal cause, whatever you want to call it. And the relationship that the scientist's heart has to that entity or being or reality, I mean, most scientists probably wouldn't call it a reality. They would just say it was a psychological phenomena, but I don't see why you can't call it a reality if it's something that's creating reality through science. So I think it's similar to each religion has this idea of God, and they have their own particular flavor of it, and they're searching. But when religion goes bad, like you were saying, Wade, it kind of, instead of searching, it kind of self-reinforces or kind of dogmatizes that idea. So I think, and am I going off on too much of a tangent? I'm only saying that because I don't think, like, my definition of God isn't particular to a religion. I think it's particular to human consciousness rather than a particular religion. And any religion that says it knows what God is, or any person in the religion that says they know what God is saying that they don't know what God is, literally. And then the reason, literally. And then the scientist is always, the thing I like about science is it's always saying it doesn't know. You know, it's always searching for what it doesn't know to falsify itself in order to come closer to the impossible task of finding a truth. And science always admits that it'll never get to the truth, because it always has to, it's a matter of, I mean, I'm going a little bit beyond my knowledge, but it's a matter of probability, right? Science is often a matter of probability, not absolute knowledge, I guess. So when I talk to people, and when I'm in my mind and I'm not in my dogmatic religious mind, when I talk to anybody and we have a conversation that's about reality, whether they're atheists or not, I don't consider that not searching. That's all. Everyone is in the same boat searching for God. It's just that some people call it God and some people don't. We all have the desire for truth, right? Which is more or less what separates us from animals. So it's that same thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wade, what do you think?
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, Jafar. I loved especially could see my reaction about if you say you know what God is, you're proving that you don't, which is very true because your mind cannot comprehend and fathom what God is. But at the same time, we are instructed by religion to know God and to come to know God, and so but it's a quest, right? And getting back to that expansion consolidation, or 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? It's a constant search. I do believe, to take a tiny contention with one thing, you said contention's the wrong word, but I do believe science does come to conclusions about some things, right? But when it prematurely comes to conclusions, and when it tries to convince others of those conclusions without being able really to prove it, which the bigger the question, the broader its application. Let's take that famous topic of climate change, Daniel. Sorry, I'll go there. To claim to know exactly what a nation or a world should do about it has to be declared to be an experiment, right? There is no way, to that point about falsifying it, right? You have to get agreement that we should try this. We should try this, rather than coercing everybody and saying, this is the solution.
Oh, wait.
Right? No, let's go there, Daniel. I'll put you on the spot now. Why are you laughing? What is it that science has concluded that is ripe for coercion on this point?
I mean, I love it.
Around climate change.
When did you stop beating your wife, Wade? Right? It's
not that kind of a question at all. Okay,
so
remove the word coercion, right? What is it about climate change that science has concluded that it should begin to enact laws about?
Okay, so first of all, I think you're holding our international community and discussion at a higher level, at an unnecessarily high bar. Okay, if science, basically like an embodiment of science, came knocking on the door, or there was a fourth person in this room that was the embodiment of science.
We're pretending now, right?
Right, yeah, we're pretending. No, but it's useful to have it. He's going to be in this other spot right over here, right? She is going to be in this other spot right here, okay? She is the embodiment of science. She's like, I have a 98% chance that there's an asteroid headed for your planet, and it's going to kill everybody on the planet. Wade's like, wait a minute, unless you can offer 100% proof, I am not going to sign on to a plan for that.
That's a caricature of what I said.
No, but okay, let's use a.
And in my opinion, it's inaccurate. But go ahead.
Let's put the spectrum in place, okay? Because this is a really good philosophical exercise, okay? So you're saying I've taken it to the point of hyperbole. I've made it to a point where it's ridiculous, and there's.
No, you haven't taken it. It's the opposite. You have grossly oversimplified it. My point, Daniel, is this. There is a complex system of systems, right? And when you start imposing radical change on that system of systems to protect to protect the participants of that system from a future catastrophe, beware, because you will be held accountable for the lives that you destroy in the process, because you're not God, you're not omniscient. Science is not omniscient. And when they start dictating radical changes to the global economy, people will die.
Okay. All right. So how do we look at this objectively?
And you could apply that to the whole vaccine thing too, and what's emerging now in terms of information and data that's been covered up. And I don't want to go deep into that either, because I'm not pro or against. I'm just saying when you have godlike powers, go now. Let's choose a different caricature, right? Go watch any superhero, supervillain movie, and you'll see how that plays out with the one who has godlike powers and thinks they have a better solution for humanity.
Can I make a quick analogy?
Yeah.
So what if and this is, this is a what if. What if there's a corporation out there that says, yeah, everyone's pretty much agreed that climate change is happening. A corporation out there says they have the solution, but they happen to be a bad corporation. But they happen to be the biggest and the best, and they're able to convince all the world's leaders that their solution is the one.
Some global energy company, for example.
Whatever it is, yeah. I mean, it's just. But
or a car maker.
What if they're not only wrong, but they're malicious and they want to,
Well, we don't need. But let's not go there. Yeah. Let's not go down the malicious route.
Sure.
Their intentions are pure. They want to help humanity.
Okay.
So then how do we
because if they're
discern,
malicious, that's a whole other element that we don't need.
How do we then discern between the corporation or the group that has the good solution to climate change and the one that has the bad solution? Because that's what we have to do in the end. We can't just go with whichever one. We have to figure out which one's the best. And how does everyone in each country know that their leaders are finding the best solution and not the least good solution or a bad one?
Let's take a very specific example. The farmers in Holland who are being told to change their farming practices because of some, related to, and I don't know if this is, I think this is climate change related, nitrogen fertilizer, that issue, right? And the farmers are protesting because they see it differently, and they think, number one, they're going to be bankrupted. And they're also saying that, look, we're using the farming methods that science told us to use, and now science is telling us we can't do it. But the whole infrastructure has been established based on what science told us yesterday, and you can't turn that on a dime. And the farmers are all going to go bankrupt, and the government's going to take over the food production, and that's a concern. And the new scientists are saying, don't worry, it's all going to be wonderful. Just like the old scientists said, here, use these food production methods. But at scale, millions and millions of lives are going to be experiencing whatever the results are of these experiments.
Right, or just leave it alone, and millions of people will die as a result of natural disaster. So, I mean, we either lull our civilization into sleep, and we'll just let it happen.
No, that's the thing, and this is a very, we talked earlier. Jafar and I are both Baha'is. This is a very Baha'i perspective. There's a middle ground, and it's called somehow getting these opposing sides to not view themselves as opposing, but to rather find a way to get them to sit down and talk. That's why what I'm proposing is one has to accept that at this scale of global problems facing humanity, you don't get to impose, because it is an experiment. It is going to be an experiment. And people... Geneva Convention, right? You cannot be experimented on against. There's informed consent, and the societies have to participate in informed consent. Now, and this approach is in some ways being taken, right, with the Paris Climate Accords, where the nations are getting together and they're discussing and they're reaching agreement. And then, one nation pulls out and another nation says they will, but doesn't actually do, right? And you have the same problems with nations and millions of people that you had when my children and I were playing Monopoly the other night. It's the exact same problem. The scale is just bigger. Roll the clip of the family playing Monopoly that ends with the 6-year-old girl upending the table and tossing the Monopoly pieces all over the room, right? Roll that clip. You get my point, is that at scale, it's not funny. It's that scene is not funny at scale.
No.
But it's funny, when it's just the three of us talking.
Well, I mean let's say, if I can frame it for the listeners, that's why, more so than just an opinion, I try and form something that I think would offer a perspective that would be helpful in this situation, right? And as a rational thinking human being, I have the choice to try and figure out, how can I articulate, how can I storytell, how can I make an ideal that would bridge those two worlds. And this is how I would describe what I'm witnessing in terms of our culture. I think a lot of the fears which Wade is explaining, I think, come from the recognition that there is a neoliberal force, okay, that's out to pretty much power grab. This is what the opposite side would actually say. I want to stay away from politics, but it's just a broad characterization of a new power grab for the new world order. That's what it's been accused of, right? On the other side of the coin, I think there's the average citizen that's saying, hey, wait a minute, like, part of the social contract is that we believed in a God, to jump off what Jafar was saying earlier, that was economic in nature. It was spelled GDP. It means we worked hard, we put in our dues, we paid our taxes, we followed all the rules of society that were laid out in front of us, right? Went to your universities, did everything that we were supposed to do for generations. And now all of a sudden it's like, wait, what? I can't do this? And I need to strip my carbon footprint down so that it's equal or more on par with some sort of universal, rights across the world. I don't know, Wade, if we have that capability to galvanize as a human species and organize in that way. When and I'm going to say when collapse-like conditions come, what do you think is going to happen? Who's going to give the dignity that needs to happen? Who's going to feed the people that are starving? Like, when our electrical grids are frozen, or our 2/3 of our crop yields are not coming in. It's great that we have the rights. It's great even that we had enforcements of rights, which we never did have in the human rights. But, okay, who's going to do it?
Daniel, if you're asking me personally,
No, I mean, generally,
or are you asking me as a
society,
representative?
right?
Are you asking me as a representative of a group of people that you're describing here, or are you asking me personally?
Well, let's just take the roles as the embodiment of the God figure here. So, how would you ideally look at it? I mean, I'm looking for the wisdom.
I would say this. So, and by the way, for the listeners, my second book, The Hardness of the Heart, details my rise in the corporate world, working for Deloitte Consulting and as a management consultant to some of the world's largest financial institutions, including Countrywide, the CEO of which was listed as the #1 cause of the economic meltdown on Time Magazine, January 2009, I believe it was. So the point is, I also know something about business, right? I spent probably now more years in business than I did as a minister, right? So from the perspective of GDP, and I've shared this in the past, but I'll explain it again just for the context of my answer as to why I have half a wit about me on this topic. I was very close. I did strategic planning for that company, Countrywide, that the CEO of which was listed as the #1 cause of the economic meltdown. And when President Obama took power and he made the decisions that he did, which were criticized by many on the left as not going far enough because he continued with the bailouts and whatnot, he was trying to keep the global economy alive. And there were those who were arguing at that time that he should have introduced pieces of the Great Reset, if there is indeed such a thing. By the Great Reset, I mean reshape the economic structure of the world. Let those banks fail. Let a new system arise. Do not bail those banks out. They are the problem. What you were talking about, Daniel, as being caused at some point in the future by climate change, it was happening right then on steroids. The global economic system was on the verge of collapse, not because of climate change. Had nothing to do with climate change. It had to do with a massive, gargantuan economic bubble that was popping. And it would have caused millions and millions of death by starvation. There would have been cities that would have experienced the zombie apocalypse, literally, without power, without air conditioning, without heating, depending on what season of the year it was, and no food deliveries. We would have had that catastrophe then, not caused by climate change. So the world's ecosystem is fragile, and it's not just the natural. It is the human society depends on a healthy planet with nature able to sustain it. But human society, as we have developed it with its cities and its unsustainable, beehives of people, right? Living on top of each other with no means of producing food for themselves or taking care of their own waste or heating themselves or cooling themselves, and no awareness of the incubated comfort in which they live. That is fragile. That's what I'm getting at, Daniel. And when somebody somewhere who's studying the effects of ozone and has no clue about global economic systems and the flow of goods around the planet, when that person suddenly gets to dictate, because he's the so-called adult in the room, he's the chief head scientist who is acting like God and telling everybody what to do, the unintended consequences are catastrophic. And they could bring about the very thing that they're trying to prevent, which, again, go watch those cartoon movies about the supervillain. It's actually apropos in this. It's not a gross caricature. It actually kind of gets at the reality, in my humble opinion.
Well, and you're saying the scientist?
No, I'm saying that in those movies, right, there's always a supervillain who has some reason why he wants full control. Because he's got some vision, some version of what humanity should do. And if in those more enlightened movies where he's not nefarious, he's not evil intent, the supervillains are actually the good intentioned people who create the Frankenstein monster. That's why, Dr. Frankenstein was trying to do something good, but he created the Frankenstein monster. And what's her name? Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, or whatever her name was, that wrote that book. That book emerged at a time when technology was advancing in a rudimentary form, and that's why the Frankenstein monster was kind of scary at that time. It was the zeitgeist, right, of the time. That was the kind of monster that humanity was capable of creating. And in my view, then we had vampires for a long time, because a lot of the people in this world, they're like vampires sucking the life out of other people. But the monster movie of the last several decades of choice is the zombie movie. Why? Because it describes our society today. And
a fear that the society has that if civilization did collapse, that's kind of what it would be like. Is like
exactly, and that people are mindlessly going along. It's kind of like lemmings, right? Zombies are a horror version of lemmings, right? All running off, overpopulating, unable to sustain the herd, and running off the cliff.
I think scientists, as a matter of fact, I know scientists there's certain scientists that will go beyond that and go into the public realm, and try and bang the drum. Okay, like Michael Mann, for example. I did a video montage with him and his material. But generally, scientists are saying, "Here's the problem. Now you guys figure it out." So you say day one, scientists, 1974.
I love scientists. I'm not against scientists.
No, I know, but it does. The way you frame the conversation it antagonizes a dichotomy between science and religion. And I think this is the wrong thing to set the stage from the beginning. It shouldn't be about that. It is about
Of
the
course
fact
not,
that we have,
and I'm certainly not trying to do that at all.
no, but naturally, and I've heard it from both Wade and Jafar. You say, well, the scientists didn't know this. Well, so what? The scientists didn't know this, or the scientists tell us to do this. So what? So what? That doesn't mean that you throw science into a bag and say, wait a minute, science was wrong, like it was one big sort of answer to a question. It's just silly, right? The fact of the matter is that we have too much carbon in our system.
So
And
Daniel,
what
I
are
just
we going to
feel
do about it?
emphatically, I am not saying that at all. For the audience, for you, not at all what I'm saying. And my apologies if it came across that way in my effort to paint a picture.
Okay, so then maybe let me bridge it then. Okay, the thing was, I think that Wade and Jafar are basically saying is that it's great if the scientists want to get together and talk about what to do, but make sure you bring the religious group into the conversation. We all discuss this together. Basically,
Everybody, it's not just religion, but certainly, religion and science are viewed as two wings of one bird, right? Who was it? Einstein made some quote about religion without science is lame, and science without religion is blind, or vice versa. I forget what, right?
Right. So this all has to do with what we do about it. But in terms of the science itself, religion doesn't have a say in the science itself, does it?
No. Well, fair enough, accepted.
Okay. So basically, we got to say, what do we do about it? And that's a different story.
But let me say something. In discussing climate change, I wasn't bringing religion into the discussion at all. It has nothing to do with religion.
But it's the theme of our show, right? It's like,
true.
So what is the role of that?
But the point was coercion, right? The point was coercion rather than agreement, right? So in order to enact a solution to what science has uncovered about climate change, we need to reach agreement. The world has to agree, and science, and this is, we are personifying science. Science must be honest that it doesn't have all the answers, and that it is proposing an experiment, right? When these complex issues get turned into sound bites, whoever it is that is speaking on behalf of quote science can be equated to a high priest in religion, because they're performing the same function of society, which is to pronounce what the divine God has said, but the God is unknowable.
But I think we're taking it too far. The scientist is saying, okay, he shows up and he says, this is the science. Now, Wade, Jafar, Daniel, all the rest of society, you decide what to do with it. I'll check back tomorrow. Just wait. I'll check back tomorrow. Science guy comes back the next day. Okay, what are you guys going to do about it? We're like, I don't know. We can't agree with it. Okay, I'm going to come back tomorrow. Meanwhile, 25 years go by, and they come by, the science guy comes, knock, knock. Hi, guys. So what are you guys going to do about it? And they go, we still can't figure it out.
But there is no science guy that has that answer, because it's
Bingo.
a very complex system of systems, right? In which you need I don't know how many disciplines of science are really needed to propose a solution to climate change.
Doesn't propose a solution, Wade. Period. It's not proposing a solution. They say we have proof that there's too much carbon in these ice core samples up in the Arctic. That's it. We can't survive off of this with this level of carbon. It's accelerating too fast. They didn't say what to do about it. They said it's accelerating too fast and it needs to come down. Wade, what are we going to do about it? Science didn't say anything about what we're going to do about it. Not unless we get into a social science. Not unless we look at Marxism. Not unless we look at other forms of government and political science. These are the arts. These are disciplines. These, I could see how you could throw it into a semi-quasi religion, right?
But I'm not. No. So let's take that. So I lived in Pasadena, California. It used to be called Smogadina. After unleaded gasoline was introduced, the smog largely cleared up, and it's a beautiful city. You can see the mountains all year round, not just for 2 months in August when the winds blow it away. So great decision experiment, right? Now they're forcing electric vehicles, right? And forcing is too strong of a word. They are incentivizing electric vehicles in California. California's been a leader in electric vehicles. And by the way, we drive hybrids, right? Huge fan of it. We could go into the micro unit and talk about, well, these batteries are worse for the environment long term than were the fossil fuel cars. That's a whole, and those scientists can go in and study that issue. But what's happening now is California is mandating that electric vehicles may not be charged up, and you can't get your electric vehicle charged up in California right now because the electricity grid is about to collapse, right? Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about. It has nothing to do with religion. It's just when a solution gets proposed by whomever proposes it, the problems at scale are enormous, and there are unintended consequences. And those dissenting voices that in this instance, they're not coming from religion. I don't know why we sort of got onto the foot of somehow anyone who opposes whatever about climate change, that it's coming from a religious perspective. I don't think that's fair, right? There are other reasons why people might oppose this, that, or the other proposed solution to climate change, and those dissenting voices need to continue to be heard. And we need to have the discussion and reach agreement. To your point, it's the problem continues to get worse, but this is a human problem on any subject where, that African saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The problem comes when you need to go far fast, right? Is that you can't do it. It's really, really difficult to go far fast because you got to bring everybody along. And if you don't, you're going to have that 2 steps forward. So let's circle back and crash land this plane here on human rights. This is the 2 steps forward, 1 step back that we saw in that opening video on human rights, right? This is the challenge at scale to make it stick. And we're still having that problem today. As it showed at the end of the video, people are dying, people are starving. This is your point, Daniel, that those human rights are empty words because we as a species haven't found a way to make them stick. The video points out, well, the problem was it wasn't made law. And it should be made law. But we don't yet have the international set of agreements that allows those laws to be made and to be enforced. So, for example, at the United Nations, we have a Security Council where 5 nations have veto votes, right? So we haven't yet come up with a fair and equitable system to make all this stick, or with the governing bodies that can deliberate and determine how to propose a solution and make it stick and not have it create more horrific unintended consequences than the problem we were trying to solve.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. So there's the intentions, but then there's the unexpected results that may unfold as a result of those decisions, right? Yeah.
And to get back to religion has, in that sense, experimented with these kinds of coercions. And you can study religions and where they get things right and where they go off the rails and the problems that are caused. So, our friend Sam Harris, not personal friend, but we've talked about him in the past, has identified...
You don't need to qualify that. You can just keep going. Right?
has identified, some of those issues with religion where people want to throw out that baby with the bathwater because religion has created plenty of these unintended consequences of its own and horrific wars and human misery and suffering all in the name of religion. That's happened too.
I have to say, I don't know. I was trying to explain this, but one of my contributions as a philosopher was to try and come up with a system that would encompass and bring everybody along, right? And as far as I could determine, you need to make it economic, and you need to make it so that it's incentivizing the right things. So it is in the form of something similar to what Wade is describing, like a Great Reset. And it's almost like everybody was holding a piece of the pie. Like imagine, and I don't know if these work, because the last few times I've tried to do them, they kind of fall apart, right? But you have to try and see the intent behind it. Imagine, there's only 12 people in the world, and they're all holding the pie, right? And they represent all of humanity. And the only way to make this work is that if all the people holding the pie all let go at the same time, right? Equally, so that the thing falls and it just, lays flat. You can't, and that's why I'm almost wondering that as much as I come trying to imagine an ideal, right? I kind of know that, like, deep down, I know that it's probably just, like, impractical, not possible, too simplistic, right? The real answer will reveal itself as humanity progresses, but it's the tragic nature of wanting to solve something and look at it. And I think that's maybe one of the Achilles of the secular thinker, right? It's not having sufficient faith in the natural unfolding of history or of humanity just on its own operating system. Because after all, isn't a faith and a godlike belief a very natural outgrowth of society? And so for me, it seems like the psychology of the religious underpinning is to say, wait a minute, you can't really know that, and if we live more in the present and love the people around us and support the communities the best we can, that's the best we can do. That's how I would summarize it.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a thought on that, Jafar. I do, but Daniel and I have been dominated. I want to give you a chance here.
No, go ahead. I'm good.
Well, two thoughts, Daniel. So the first is that religious ideas we can see patently, and my own image of myself is really bothering me now. I just got to try to get my camera to refocus here. Religious ideas throughout human history, we can see that they have the power to transform the thinking of millions of people at large scales, right? So religious ideas have been captivating. And again, this is good and bad, and throughout history you see this pattern of that opening of the mind to accept these new concepts, the conversion experience, but then that closes in on itself, becomes a hermetically sealed system, and becomes dogma. But religious ideas do have the ability to capture the human imagination and the heart and transform people to at some point and in some way be willing to all let go of the pie at the same time, right? So that's the first comment, that is a role that religion can play. It doesn't have to. It can come in other ways, and I'm not saying here, I'm not in sharing that, I'm not advocating exclusively for religion to the exclusion of humanitarian, altruistic goodwill that might arise in other ways. But I will also make a comment. You weren't here for this. We talked about this last week before you arrived. I had a recent awareness change of a parable in the book of Matthew chapter 25, where it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, right, the return of Jesus, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will separate, he will assemble the nations and separate them the way that a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. I'm not quoting it exactly, and I don't want to take the time to pull it up. It's more subtle in that, and that passage had always led me and most of the other people that I know to look at it as an individual thing. And then the returning Jesus in his glory separates the sheep and the goats based on what the individual did, right? Did they give a glass of water to the thirsty? Did they feed the hungry? And I've always applied that personally, and I've thought a lot about this because I want to be a goat. I want to be a sheep, not a goat. And in the sense, for those who know, the goat, the greatest of all time, right? Serena Williams, not that kind of goat. I'd love to be that kind of a goat, the greatest of all time. But no, the kind of goat that Jesus is referring to, you want to be a sheep, right? You want to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And the sheep are those who gave the water to the thirsty, who visited the person in prison, right? It's a very discrete, minute individual action. But that's actually not what the passage is talking about. Upon closer inspection, it is literally saying he will separate the nations based on this behavior. And this led to this understanding about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be viewed from a religious perspective as a prophetic fulfillment. Because now the nations have chosen a standard by which they claim they will judge themselves, right? And Jesus in that same book of Matthew is quoted as saying, "Judge not, because whatever judgment you use, that is how you will be judged. And guess what? You will be found wanting. So don't judge others. Just go do the right thing yourself." Right? In your analogy, Daniel, go ahead and let go of that pie. Don't worry about whether somebody else is going to. Throw yourself on the global mosh pit, whatever analogy you want to use. Just Elsa, let it go, right? But it's fascinating to me to come to this realization that when the Son of Man returns in his glory, he will separate the sheep from the goats at a national scale. And indeed, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights serves that purpose because now the nations are judging themselves. And again, this is another example of how I view religion as being non-coercive. I don't believe that Jesus is literally descending from the clouds and punishing this nation and rewarding that nation. But rather, these punishments and these rewards are inherent in the natural order of things. And so you don't need to believe in a God. The person who does believe in a God will believe that God created it that way so that it works that way without his direct involvement. It's a perfectly crafted machine that's so far beyond human comprehension. But you don't have to view it that way at all because the outcome is the same. And the nations are, in fact, judging themselves on those same criteria. It was just fascinating to realize that the nations today are judging themselves based on the criteria in that little parable that Jesus gave 2,000 years ago. Are you giving water to the thirsty? Are you feeding the hungry? If you're not, you're a goat. And I don't mean greatest of all time.
Well said. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. What nations would you see were more sheepish?
Well, in their ideals and their proclamations, most of them, right? Which gets back to this thing about religion. I don't care what you profess. I don't care if you profess that God is a Trinity or not a Trinity or that Jesus is God. I don't care what you profess. You can profess anything you want. When the Son of Man returns in his glory, you will be judged based on what you did, not on what you claimed. That's the other aspect of that parable, because the sheep and the goats both ask him when he says, "You gave me a glass of water when you saw me." And he tells the goats, you did not give me a glass of water when I was thirsty. And both the sheep and the goats say, "What do you mean? When did we see you?" And he answers, "When you did it to one of the least of these, you did it unto me." So neither the sheep nor the goats recognized Jesus in that sense at his return. They didn't see him at all. But what they did mattered. Not what they professed, not what they claimed to believe in, not their ability to see the unseeable, right? To believe in the imaginary man in the sky. None of that mattered at all in that parable.
It's what they did.
It's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And it scales up at the national scale. And this is why, for me, that's just proof in the veracity that is the Word of God, because it's just beyond comprehension that could have just been written, and lo and behold, you can continue to find this meaning. But again, that's me. That's just my interpretation, and it's my pattern recognition bias, as you pointed out earlier. And I'm literally not trying to convince anybody else, but I am trying to explain why I believe what I believe and where I get it from.
That's nice. Yeah.
I had one. I know we're a little over, but I had one thought about the pie. I think it takes something like a religious or a spiritual feeling in order to drop the pie before it's too late, or to, I think drop the pie is wrong, not the great, but to do the right thing before the catastrophe hits, right? Like you have to have that that sort of spiritual movement from the heart where you realize, it's not going to happen now or in 10 years, but at some point, if we don't all get together and figure this out, then it's not going to go well. So I think that the spiritual experience, or you can call it religious or whatever it is the preemptive sacrifice of the individuals or the nation's immediate gratification that allows us not to head over the cliff. Whereas after World War II, I think everyone was in such shock, right? There are no atheists in the foxhole, but everyone was in such shock, right? That they said, okay, we have to do something. It didn't matter. Everyone was kind of agreed, so they all signed up for it. Well, okay, no more.
There was a global repentance. They recoiled in horror at what they had done. And there was a recognition that we did this, not just they. There was a recognition that we were somehow all responsible. Good point, Jafar.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
Yeah. So where do we take it now, Wade?
Well, I think we shut it down because Jafar and I were talking right before you joined this morning that we want to keep it to that hour. We've gone, almost an hour and a half. But I love that we could go on and that we want to go on. As long as we leave ourselves wanting more, hopefully we'll also leave the audience wanting more. So thank you both. And Daniel, Jafar, any inputs into what we might cover next week's show, or anyone out there in the audience? I will just check here. So not seeing anything right now as input and posting into this. So please send us emails, click the subscribe button, let us know where you would like us to take it from here. I believe that we're mining some really rich material here as we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in this context. And Daniel, so much appreciate you being here to provide your perspective. One of the things maybe we can cover next week is a little bit more that transition between Cyrus the Great to Greece, because I know you probably have some thoughts there and some experience as to, what the Greeks did. The video just glosses over that moment, in a nanosecond. But would love to hear a little bit more from you on that. And Jafar, as always, really appreciate your input. Looking very much forward to continuing this conversation next week. Same time, same place, at our new time, which is 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. And for Daniel on the West Coast, up north, our neighbor in Canada, 6 p.m. North American Pacific time. Thank you so much, guys.